On 100.9 WXIR, this is Evidence of Design, and I'm your host, Jason Taylor. Good morning and welcome to Evidence of Design. I am your host, Jason Taylor, and I'm joined today by my good friend and co-host, Matt Treadwell.
Good morning.
This is our 11th episode of Evidence of Design, folks, and we come to you live on air from WXIR Studios in Rochester, New York, every Saturday from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. You can listen to our past shows on YouTube by searching for the Evidence of Design channel. Just be specific with your search, such as Evidence of Design Episode 1. You can email us throughout the show at evidenceofdesign101@gmail.com. And we'd love to have an open discussion, so we encourage you to call in at 585-219-8889. If you have a question or thought you'd like to contribute, we would love to hear it. So for the past 2 weeks on Evidence of Design, we've talked about the focus of our show, which is neoliberalism, or the political and economic policies that give a lot more power to the capitalist free market than collective institutions. We haven't discussed current affairs in a while, so on today's show, Matt and I will run through a sort of week in the news. We'll discuss some of the major headlines this week, providing context for those that may have missed some of the events, and an open dialogue on the significance of said events. We'll progress through a chronological order, starting with Monday's opening of the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem, then the proposed meeting between North Korea and the U.S., the 1-year mark of Special Counsel Robert Mueller's investigation, the fate of the U.S. Farm Bill, and lastly, the most recent school shooting in the nation, which happened yesterday. That's the name of the game for our show today, and once again, we'd love to have you email us, evidenceofdesign101@gmail.com, or go ahead and call in 585-219-8889. Matt, let's take it away.
Everybody's talking about the stormy weather. What's a man to do but work out whether it's true? Looking for a man with a focus and a temper who can open up a map and see between 1 and 2. Time to get it before you let it get to you. Here he comes now. Stick to your guns and let him
through. Matt, who was the artist of that wonderful audio painting that we just heard right there?
That was Sonic Youth with the song Teenage Riot.
Has Sonic Youth been around for a while?
Since the early 80s.
What are they doing nowadays?
They've broken up.
Okay.
Yeah, it's kind of a sad story.
Do folks know about Sonic Youth? What is their importance to the sort of music scene?
They're one of the most seminal and influential alternative rock bands of the last 30 years.
And why did you pick that Sonic Youth song?
'Cause I like it, really. But we're talking about Israel a lot this week, and the U.S.'s embassy move to Jerusalem and recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital. And there is a line that some of you might have caught in the first verse of Teenage Riot, where Thurston Moore sings, "Looking for a man with a focus and a temper who can open up a map and see between 1 and 2." And I thought that was appropriate for today's topic.
Right, so we're doing a week in the news today here on Evidence of Design, and again, we'll progress chronologically through the week, and the first thing we'll talk about is what happened this past Monday with sort of an announcement in Jerusalem. There was a meeting there, and it sort of officially opened the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem. And this was and still is a big deal for a number of reasons. And we'd like to start out with a clip really from that meeting. This is from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, the leader of Israel.
Today, the embassy of the most powerful nation on earth, our greatest ally, the United States of America, today its embassy opened here.
So once again, that was Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel. He's been leading Israel for quite some time, and he's had up and down relationships with the U.S. Right now, U.S.-Israeli relations are quite close. They weren't close, and they're actually quite tenuous under the Obama administration, and we'll kind of dive into some of the reasons for that. But right now, the U.S. and Israel have pretty close relations, and two of the reasons for that is because Donald Trump recently announced that the U.S. was pulling out of the Iran nuclear deal, which Israel is perhaps the country on the planet most opposed to that deal. So they were quite happy with Trump's decision to pull out of that, and also with the U.S.'s decision to move its embassy to Jerusalem. Relations right now between the two leaders are very close. So, Matt, what is the significance of the U.S. moving its embassy to Jerusalem? Every country has embassies in every other country. So Jerusalem is, some people would see it as the capital of the land that is known as Israel. What's the significance of moving that?
Well, it's kind of difficult to explain the full significance of the event without going into the history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which we are going to do later in the show. But I guess a good place to start would be just by saying that the U.S. is the first country in the world to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, a capital that both Israel and the state of Palestine claim. Interestingly, following Monday's announcement of the opening of the embassy, there have been a few countries, Guatemala in particular, moved their embassy from Tel Aviv to Tel Aviv is Israel's currently recognized capital, or at least it was. And Guatemala moved its embassy to Jerusalem. And then I've also heard reports that Romania and Paraguay are also considering moving, even though it's highly controversial at this point because the UN, for example, most countries on the UN do not recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital.
And why is that? If you talk about Israel, you have to also talk about Palestine. And are you able to provide listeners, what is Palestine, for those who don't know?
So Palestine is I can talk about this, but we'd have to really go.
Yeah, just what is Palestine? I mean,
Palestine is a state that was originally planned to be created in the 1940s when Israel was created. A proposal was drafted by the UN Council to develop both a state of Israel and a state of Palestine, dividing the land that is mostly occupied by Israel at this point between two states, native Palestinians and Israelis, many of which had settled there recently in the past 100 years. And Palestine, as a state, did not announce its independence until 1987, and has since been recognized as a state by 136 member nations of the UN. There are 193 UN nations, so well over
majority of nations.
A majority, yeah. And interestingly, many Western nations, including the US, the UK, France, and Germany, do not recognize Palestine as a nation.
Right. Yeah, so is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is, of course, known as one of the most entrenched and intractable differences on the world stage. A century in the making, really, when you have to talk about modern sort of Israeli politics. It goes back 100 years, at least for the modern context. And again, I think we should listen to where this decision to move the embassy came from, and that came directly from Donald Trump. I believe it was December 7th of last year, December 7th, 2017. This is a somewhat lengthy clip, but I think it's worth to hear in Donald Trump's own words, the U.S.'s decision to move the embassy to Jerusalem. It has been slightly edited just for length. So, Matt, let's take it away.
My announcement today marks the beginning of a new approach conflict between Israel and the Palestinians. In 1995, Congress adopted the Jerusalem Embassy Act, urging the federal government to relocate the American embassy to Jerusalem and to recognize that that city, and so importantly, is Israel's capital. This act passed Congress by an overwhelming bipartisan majority and was reaffirmed by a unanimous vote of the Senate only 6 months ago. Yet for over 20 years, every previous American president has exercised the law's waiver, refusing to move the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem or to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital city. Presidents issued these waivers under the belief that delaying the recognition of Jerusalem would advance the cause of peace. Some say they lacked courage, but they made their best judgments based on facts as they understood them at the time. Nevertheless, the record is in. After more than 2 decades of waivers, we are no closer to a lasting peace agreement between Israel and the Palestinians. It would be folly to assume that repeating the exact same formula would now produce a different or better result. Therefore, I have determined that it is time to officially recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. In making these announcements, I also want to make one point very clear. This decision is not intended in any way to reflect a departure from our strong commitment to facilitate a lasting peace agreement. We want an agreement that is a great deal for the Israelis and a great deal for the Palestinians. We are not taking a position of any final status issues, including the specific boundaries of the Israeli sovereignty in Jerusalem or the resolution of contested borders. Those questions are up to the parties involved. The United States remains deeply committed to helping facilitate a peace agreement that is acceptable to both sides.
So, folks, that was once again December 7th, 2017. That was Donald Trump's announcement that the U.S. would be officially recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and the decision to move the U.S. Embassy there. And you are also listening to Evidence of Design here on 100.9 FM WXIR. We're doing a week in the news today, Matt and I. We're starting off with what happened on Monday, the U.S.'s decision to move the embassy to Jerusalem. Donald Trump said a number of interesting things in his statement there, one of which was that, look, it's time the world should recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. It's inevitable. It's obvious. The judicial branch of the Israeli government is in Jerusalem. The legislative branch is in Jerusalem. Jerusalem is obviously the capital for political reasons. Therefore, the rest of the world community should recognize Jerusalem as the capital, and we will take the first step in doing so. That's one of the things that Donald Trump says. And the second thing, I think, which is the most important thing to the context of what we saw this past Monday and also the violence that we saw this past Monday, was Donald Trump said, let me be very clear in that we are, this decision to move the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem is not giving up on the U.S.'s sort of objectivity in mediating the conflict between Palestine and Israel, and we are still looking for a two-state solution. That's what he said. In actuality, of course, many people interpret that as the U.S. giving up on its two-state solution and throwing its entire support behind Israel. What do you think, Matt?
Well, I mean, yeah, I do not. I would not be if I was a Palestinian living in Palestine right now, and I saw that, I would have a very difficult time believing that Donald Trump and the U.S. would be maintaining a stance of impartiality and unbiasedness towards this whole situation, because this is huge. Like I said earlier, just a few moments ago, Jerusalem is not recognized, at least up until this week, it was not recognized as the capital of Israel by any other nation in the world. And for the U.S. to do that, one of, if not the most powerful country in the world, Israel's most ardent ally for the past few decades, that's hugely significant.
And especially for prospects of Mideast peace. Of course, when we talk about the formation of Israel, it goes back 100 years, and Israel wasn't a country 100 years ago, and it really only started to become a country, if I'm correct, in the 1940s.
1947.
1947.
Well, 1948. In 1947, the UN proposed a plan to hand over control of what was then called British-mandated Palestine. So after World War I and the collapse of the Ottoman Empire being the nation that controlled the land that is now known as Israel-Palestine, the British came into control of Palestine. And this was around the time that the Zionist movement and a real sort of national identity was developing among Palestinians.
What is Zionism, Matt?
So Zionism is the political ideology or belief that it was developed, well, not necessarily developed, but popularized by the Austrian Jewish journalist Theodor Herzl, who was a Jewish man living in Eastern Europe in the late 19th century. And having been exposed and been the recipient of a lot of extreme anti-Semitism, he came to believe that the only way for the Jewish people to have a future was for them to develop a nation state of their own. And he felt that that place should be in Palestine because of the number of significant holy sites of the Jewish faith in places like Jerusalem, for example.
Sure. So, I mean, that sounds pretty significant because we know that for a long time in history, something called anti-Semitism exists. That was sort of racism and prejudice against the Jewish people. And for a long time, ever since the diaspora, and Jews have never really had their own country. So Zionism, it sounds like, is sort of the movement to create a Jewish homeland, their own nation state. And if we go back way to our first episode here on Evidence of Design, we talked about nationalism and the creation of nation states. And I think it's only possible to have an Israeli-Palestinian conflict in the current political climate that we live in, where we recognize countries as sovereign nations that control people with governments within territories. And so the conflict really becomes, it sounds like, is that if you need to have a Jewish state, is that inclusive of other people in that state? And also, you know, if so, why is it called, you know, Israel as opposed to Palestine? And
well, that's the thing. Under Israeli governance, the access that Palestinians have to a number of their own holy sites as a majority Muslim population has been significantly inhibited. There's so much to get into. Basically, about a decade ago, there was a political or a extremely violent protest movement called the Second Intifada, and Intifada means uprising. And basically, several thousand people died, Israelis and Palestinians. And when the dust settled, basically, when the violence came to an end, many people in Israel became much more skeptical of the idea of having any sort of real lasting peace with Palestinians. And so in my research, it was reported that a number of the Israeli government, first of all, they swung right in response to the Second Intifada. They began to set up walls and checkpoints in order to more closely monitor and inhibit the movements of Palestinian people. And it's interesting to note that since at least the late 1960s, after the Six-Day War, and the occupation of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip by the Israeli government has been responsible for governing the Palestinian people, which are a people that they have been in conflict with for about 100 years now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you look at a map of what land is controlled by the Israeli government, over and over and over it gets smaller, or more and more land is controlled by the Jewish people in Israel, and the Palestinians have less and less land. And as I mentioned, relations between the U.S. and Israel were at perhaps a historic low under Barack Obama, because Obama was frequently saying, like, look, Israel, if you keep building these settlements and constructing walls, it is very hard to see how the two-state solution, which has been the sort of the international consensus on how to bring about peace in Israel and Palestine, is to have a two-state solution. If you keep creating settlements and building walls, it is very hard to see how peace will ever come to Israel. Well, as you mentioned, Israel's been governed by arguably a far right. It depends. I don't know Israeli politics as well as I know U.S. politics, but Benjamin Netanyahu is definitely a conservative.
Yes. It's interesting that you bring up sort of the strained relations between Barack Obama and Benjamin Netanyahu, because one thing I wanted to sort of bring up myself for this episode was we didn't really talk about it, but in the Trump piece we played, he mentioned the Jerusalem Embassy Act, which was a law passed in 1995 by the Republican-controlled Congress. It passed with overwhelming support. If I'm looking at the Wikipedia page right now, it says 93 members of the Senate versus 5 members voted for it, and 374 members of the House versus 37. Mm-hmm. Historically, and what has been my personal experience, it has long felt that most people in America favor Israel, over Palestine. And there's a number of reasons why that's been. But something I have felt, something I've been acutely aware of recently is that a lot of young people, a lot of people from my generation and younger, seem to be becoming more sympathetic to Palestine. And I don't know exactly why that is. I wonder if that has to do with, coming up under Obama, for example.
I think that might be a recent generational shift. But also, Matt, what happened on Monday? 60 Palestinians were killed, right?
That's right.
Can you describe what happened with that?
So, a number of, it began as a protest against the embassy move, of course, because Palestinians feel that they have as much of a claim to Jerusalem as Israelis do, and personally, I believe that that's true. So it began as a protest along the border of the Gaza Strip between Gaza and Israel. There's a fence, a barbed wire fence, I believe.
And Gaza, just to be quick, is a very small parcel of land in the very southwest part of Israel, and that is sort of where it's the largest continuous plot of land that Palestinians have been relegated to,
right.
And it's surrounded by a fence into the entrance to Israel proper. And Gaza is controlled arguably by Hamas, which much of the world, the Western world at least, describes Hamas as a terrorist organization.
Yes, they are an extremist group who, up until last year, when they changed their charter, had called for the complete annihilation of Israel.
Yeah.
Anyway, so protesting broke out along the Gaza Strip, along the Gaza border between Gaza and Israel, and so there was reports that some of the protesters were violent. Some of them were throwing rocks, Molotov cocktails, flaming kites. The Israeli military reported that they killed 3 Palestinians who were trying to plant some sort of explosive device on the fence to perhaps blow it up. In response, the Israeli soldiers killed 60 Palestinians. There was a quote I wanted to bring up real quick.
That's remarkable. 60 individuals were killed on Monday.
That's
as a result
more
of
than
protests.
that's more people than died in the Las Vegas shooting in last year. I guess it doesn't have necessarily the same punch because it happened in the country on the other side of the world, but those are 60 people, 60 lives that were lost.
Absolutely, and you can always debate about the relative peacefulness of protests. I get that. I totally understand that you can endlessly debate whether or not someone is justifiably protesting using acts of violence in ways that you think they should or should not use. But the point is that the country was not really at war, and these individuals were, by all accounts, unarmed.
Right, and actually, the quote I wanted to bring up was Rupert Colville, who is a spokesperson for the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. He gave a statement earlier this week saying that in the Commissioner's point of view, while some Palestinian demonstrators tried to damage the barbed wire fence that separates Gaza from Israel, their attempts to cross or damage the fence did not amount to a threat to life or serious injury, and they were not sufficient grounds for the use of live ammunition. So, yes, there was perhaps some protesters who incited violence, but to the degree that 60 people needed to be killed, I find that difficult to believe, personally.
And that seems to happen quite often. There's always tit for tat violence in Israel and Palestine. And maybe, Matt, in summary, to move on to other things that happened this week, it is worth noting that Israel, by all accounts, does have nuclear weapons. That's never been sort of official, but folks pretty much accept that Israel is a nuclear power, and that's worth considering when you talk about Iran, whether or not Iran should be a nuclear power. And of course, Israel and Iran are almost existentially sworn enemies. Israel buys tons of U.S. weapons. Israel and the U.S. share a lot of intelligence. There's a lot of business partnerships between the two. So by all accounts, for many people around the world, it has seemed like for a long time the U.S. is basically unconditional support for Israel, although rhetorically supporting a two-state solution. And that creates a lot of violence. Many self-proclaimed, there are many individuals who we would describe as terrorists who they may themselves describe them as freedom fighters, fight against the U.S. because of its support for Israel. So, when Donald Trump says an seemingly innocuous statement to an everyday American civilian that we're moving the embassy to Jerusalem, it does have profound political implications. And arguably that, for example, the 60 individuals who lost their lives on Monday, again, this is way too complicated to blame it on that one incident, but it is worth noting that these things do have consequences geopolitically that affects many individuals around the planet.
Yeah. As you said, the U.S. has a long history of favoring Israel. Despite that, it has oftentimes in the past attempted to take the role of mediator between Palestine officials and Israeli officials. But with Trump's announcement on Monday, or with the unveiling of the embassy, rather, it's going to be much more difficult, if even possible, for the U.S. to assume that role with any degree of credibility. Right.
So I think we pivot now to another topic that happened this week in the news. I believe it was Wednesday, May 16th. And this was the planned talks between North Korea and the U.S., another major geopolitical struggle. And folks, if you're just joining us, you are listening to Evidence of Design here on 100.9 WXIR. We're talking about a week in the news, and we just discussed really the importance and context around the U.S.'s decision to move the embassy to Jerusalem, which was opened this past Monday. Please do give us an email, evidenceofdesign101@gmail.com, or as always, we'd love to have you call in 585-219-8889. We'll be very brief here with the North Korea story. If folks have been paying attention, North Korea and the U.S. have planned a historic summit, never happened before, where a leader of North Korea in the modern context has met with the U.S. president. That meeting is set for June 12th, right around the corner, and it's supposed to happen in Singapore, where Kim Jong-un, the leader of North Korea, and Donald Trump, our president, will meet and discuss what do we do about each other? How do we create a world where we can coexist? This Wednesday, North Korea released a statement that said it may cancel the meeting between it and the U.S. and also that it canceled a South Korean meeting that same day. And it canceled those meetings because it protested, really, it complained about the U.S. military drills with South Korea. And it also lamented a statement by, what is his title? I believe it's National Security Advisor. Trump has so many cabinet members, I can't keep them all straight. But John Bolton, who is known for a conservative hawk.
Is he the third one?
He is the third National Security Advisor of the administration, yeah. And John Bolton made a recent statement that he compared kind of North Korea to Colonel Gaddafi, who controlled Libya. And, of course, Gaddafi... Subtle, very subtle. Of course, if people know the history of Gaddafi made a deal with the U.S. that he wouldn't pursue nuclear weapons, but of course he ended up
doing just that.
Well, he ended up being killed by his own people with U.S. support, even though he made the deal with the U.S. not to pursue nuclear weapons. So, of course, North Korea sees that and says, well, if the U.S. wants us to give up nuclear weapons, they're still looking for regime change. They still want to dispose Kim Jong-un's regime. And, of course, that is off the table for North Korea. So that happened this Wednesday. It is interesting to note, though, that John Bolton made that statement comparing North Korea to Gaddafi a couple weeks ago. So it's interesting for North Korea to bring that up now. And it's also interesting to note that according to U.S. officials and South Korean officials, that the North Koreans tacitly agreed to have U.S. and South Korean military drills go ahead. So they allowed those drills to continue and agreed to have that summit. Meaning, yes, we're still going to have the summit, and yes, you can continue with the military drills.
What do you think is going on there, Jason?
I'm not exactly sure. I think that it's just, again, North Korea and Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump both have similar rhetorical styles, it seems like. They both like to saber rattle. They both like to be bellicose. They both like to seem like they're the strong man. And this might just be a bargaining chip to say, I think it's putting brakes on what has been a really remarkable change in North Korean, U.S., and South Korean relations. An intense thawing of very scary relations. Of course, last year Donald Trump said fire and fury with North Korea, and very serious scares about violence erupting between the countries. So I think so much has seemed to be too good to be true for so long that this might just be a rhetorical strategy just to slow down and say, hold on, West, you're not going to walk away with this, with everything that you think.
I find it difficult to believe, or I find it difficult to imagine ever seeing Kim Jong-un voluntarily offering up his nuclear weapons. I don't feel like he has much in the way of a bargaining chip beyond that. And I am, from what I understand, it seems that a lot of people, I shouldn't say it like that, that sounds very Trumpian. It's been reported by some outlets that Kim Jong-un views nuclear weapons as his key to holding power in his regime.
Yeah, absolutely. So it'll be interesting to see, of course, where U.S.-Israeli relations go, especially with Iran, now that the U.S. pulled out of the nuclear deal, and also where North Korean-U.S. relations go. But again, as of now, the historic meeting between the U.S. and North Korea is still scheduled for June 12th in Singapore, and that's not too far away, and we'll have to see what happens with that. So Monday was the opening of the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem. Wednesday was that North Korean announcement. Thursday was the year anniversary of Robert Mueller, the appointed special counsel who is looking into potential Russian interference looking into the Russian interference into the 2016 election. So I don't want to, folks should probably know about Mueller, although Mueller has never really come out with any public statements, but media outlets have heavily reported on Mueller. He used to be the FBI director before James Comey, and of course James Comey was disposed. He was fired by Donald Trump, which brought in Robert Mueller to investigate everything that he's been doing. So This Thursday was the year anniversary of Mueller's investigation, and Trump came out with a tweet that read, it's not worth debating Trump tweets, but it said, witch hunt.
Greatest witch hunt in history, probably.
Yeah. So I would just like to say, what we're seeing now is, of course, these investigations take a long time. If you look back in the history of special investigations.
Yeah, and it's not like anything hasn't happened.
Mm-hmm.
There have been a number, like you said, a number of indictments over the past year.
Absolutely, yeah. To name the most high profile, Paul Manafort, Rick Gates, George Papadopoulos, and Michael Flynn have all, well, not all of them have really pleaded guilty, but they've all been indicted, at least. Many of them have pleaded guilty and have flipped to actually help Mueller and his team. And yeah, there's been a lot that has come out of the Mueller investigation. You can look at the Mueller investigation in two lenses. One is so Mueller is doing sort of an intelligence investigation, but he's also doing a criminal investigation. So oftentimes we think of the FBI as doing criminal investigations where they kind of bust down doors, they take a bunch of evidence, and then they bring people to court. But Mueller's also doing the intelligence investigation to really analyze what was the link between Russian contacts, U.S. contacts, what do people know when they know it, and a lot of the intelligence investigation might not be disclosed to the public. And we have no idea where this Mueller investigation is going. Only Mueller knows. We don't know whether we are in the first inning, or in the ninth inning, or wherever we are.
How many innings does baseball usually have?
40. I don't know.
Okay.
There's 9. Sports. So yeah, no, we don't know where we are with this, and it will definitely be interesting to see. Something I am worried about, though, is the intense, the politicization of Mueller's investigation. Obviously, I support the investigation of Mueller because I do think that Donald Trump is guilty of something, if not at least being a terrible president. I'm fine with saying that. However, I generally support the independence and the credibility and integrity that Mueller seems to be doing with his investigation by not coming out and politicizing things such as you can argue James Comey has done. James Comey loves the spotlight. Mueller doesn't like the spotlight. I've been very worried about the blatant attempt at which Trump and other conservative media outlets have decried Mueller's investigation. And I didn't look into this. I just saw the headline last night, I believe, that it's been reported that there was a member of the FBI who was undercover investigating Donald Trump's Donald Trump's campaign in 2016, and more and more the right is trying to vilify the FBI and cry foul, which is of course an anomaly since the right generally supports law and order in the FBI. Traditionally, yeah. So we're in a very I'm scared about the integrity of our judicial systems, and of course Donald Trump and many of his right-wing opponents have tried to weaken the integrity of those institutions. And I do hope that Mueller is able to continue with his investigation. And thankfully, at least nominally, members of the conservative establishment, such as Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell, have said that Mueller should finish his investigation.
Yeah.
So it's been 1 year anniversary, and we don't know whether or not this will be done next week or in 6 years from now.
Let's pray for sooner.
Let's pray for sooner. We'll see what happens. And now, folks, there is also something that happened this week. I would love to play. It's another somewhat longer clip. This is from Rex Tillerson. We all remember another member of Trump's cabinet, Rex Tillerson.
That good old boy.
The good old boy, Rex Tillerson, used to be the CEO of ExxonMobil, and then Trump tapped him to be the U.S. Secretary of State. That's right. Yeah. And he was let go by Donald Trump through a tweet. He was not given any heads up about that. And
standard procedure.
Standard operating procedure nowadays. It says it in the government manual somewhere, I'm sure, that tweeting is the primary means through which you let your secretaries of state go. And I'd love to play this clip. This is Rex Tillerson speaking this week at a graduation ceremony for a military academy. Again, former Secretary of State Rex Tillerson. This has been edited only for its length.
As I reflect upon the state of our American democracy, I observe a growing crisis in ethics and integrity. An essential tenet of a free society, a free people, is access to the truth. A government structure and a societal understanding that freedom to seek the truth is the very essence of freedom itself. You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. It is only by fierce defense of the truth and a common set of facts that we create the conditions for a democratic, free society comprised of richly diverse peoples, that those free people can explore and find solutions to the very challenges confronting a complex society of free people. If our leaders seek to conceal the truth, or we as people become accepting of alternative realities that are no longer grounded in facts, then we as American citizens are on a pathway to relinquishing our freedom. This is the life of non-democratic societies, comprised of people who are not free to seek the truth. We know them well. Societies in Russia, China, Iran, North Korea. You can complete the list. A responsibility of every American citizen to each other is to preserve and protect our freedom by recognizing what truth is and is not, what a fact is and is not, and begin by holding ourselves accountable to truthfulness and demand our pursuit of America's future be fact-based, not based on wishful thinking, not hoped-for outcomes made in shallow promises, but with a clear-eyed view of the facts as they are and guided by the truth that will set us free to seek solutions to our most daunting challenges. It is also that foundational commitment to truth and facts that binds us to other like-minded democratic nations, that we Americans will always deal with them from the same set of truths and facts. And it is truth that says to our adversaries, we say what we mean, and we mean what we say. When we as people, a free people, go wobbly on the truth, even on what may seem the most trivial of matters, we go wobbly on America. If we do not, as Americans, confront the crisis of ethics and integrity in our society and among our leaders in both public and private sector, and regrettably at times even the nonprofit sector, then American democracy as we know it is entering its twilight years.
Again, that was Rex Tillerson, former CEO of ExxonMobil and Secretary of State, speaking at a graduation ceremony this week at a military academy. Matt, I find that remarkable, that speech. Again, it's a speech at a graduation ceremony, which we know are like the most, I don't know, what's a good way to describe graduation ceremony? Like, easy, plain, Safe. Yeah, that's a great way to describe it. It's a very safe place to say things. You just say things that are encouraging and grandiose, and then everyone kind of feels good about themselves. So I kind of get that that's maybe part of what's going on.
Right.
I don't think so, though. I mean, that was the former Secretary of State appointed by Donald Trump, who is essentially, the way I read it, he is essentially calling out the leaders of this country, i.e. Donald Trump, to say that we are being governed by an individual who does not care about the truth.
Yeah.
That is astounding to me.
I'm a little more skeptical on this than you are. I just think that this is, I don't know if I really believe that Rex Tillerson places any value in what he's criticizing, and it seems to be implying his criticism about Donald Trump. I just think that he's sour about what happened to him and how he was fired and everything, and his general relationship with Trump, which if anybody was paying attention during his tenure, there was multiple times when they sort of clashed. But I will say, in spite of all that it is remarkable because everything about this presidency has been unprecedented, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I kind of agree with you in that, Rex Tillerson is not a guy I would normally agree with. He is a CEO of ExxonMobil, a company that historically and famously is grinding its gears to prevent climate change to prevent progress from preventing climate change. I mean, he's the guy who used to run that company. He's a bajillionaire. He's a member of the 1%.
That's a real number.
It's a real number. That's how many zeros he has in his bank account. And yeah, he's not a guy I would normally look to for political inspiration. And again, this is at a speech, and yeah, he, from all accounts, and of course, what did Rex Tillerson famously call? It was alleged that he called Donald Trump
I don't know if we can say it, can we?
Yeah, I don't want to say it just because I don't agree with the word anyways. It was a sort of slur used for people who have sort of perhaps mental disabilities. And he used that word to it's alleged that he called Donald Trump that. And he never denied it when he was questioned by the press.
They were like in a fight. Like Donald Trump was like, "We'll see who wins like this IQ test or something."
Yeah, it's so they'd never had the best relationship, but I think they never had the best relationship because from the get-go, once Tillerson started the job, I would be optimistic that he saw that, oh my gosh, this country is being run by someone who does not care about truth, and he will construct his own narratives relentlessly to create his own reality and bubble.
From what we know, given from leaks from the White House, life under Donald Trump is very difficult.
Yeah.
Just in terms of keeping up with everything he says and maintaining some semblance of reality in that place.
I think there's it's safe to say there might be a causation as opposed to just a correlation between the fact that Donald Trump has had maybe 5 or 6 communication directors, more turnage in any other of his roles. The communications director has had more turnover than any other role because how can you be a communications director to someone who doesn't care about the truth? I don't know. And I think we see why there's so many communications directors is because, well, what is there to communicate? It's just whatever nonsense he comes up with to make himself feel good and try to run the country according to his own interests. But I digress, folks. We are in the sort of home stretch here of Evidence of Design, episode 11 of 100.9 FM WXIR. We are doing a week in the news because we haven't done so in a while. Ever, really. Yeah, but, sometimes we do current events, yeah. And on Monday, the U.S. decided to move its embassy to Jerusalem. Well, it didn't decide. It officially moved its embassy to Jerusalem. On Wednesday, North Korea threatened to pull out of talks with the U.S. On Thursday, what happened on Thursday? It was the anniversary, the 1-year anniversary of Special Counsel Robert Mueller's investigation into Russian interference into the 2016 U.S. campaign. And also, we just heard a campaign speech from Rex Tillerson. Graduation, that's right. Thank you, Matt. A graduation speech from former Secretary of State Rex Tillerson. In the last few minutes, we'd like to fit in 2 more things that happened this week, and in fact, they happened just yesterday. The first one is the current state of affairs with the Farm Bill. Folks may have not heard about this before, but the Farm Bill is essentially a piece of legislation that is passed or renewed every 5 or so years. It's an omnibus bill, meaning there's a number of different provisions and things that need to be funded that are inside of it. So it's a large package, and it's up for renew this year, and it has been a politically contentious process.
Recently. As I understand it, omnibus can include a wide variety of things that don't necessarily have any relation to each other.
Yeah, and that's a great point, and thank you. We talked a little bit about that, I think, when we had our shows on gun violence. Mm-hmm. Why this is an omnibus bill largely is because in the 1970s, when, I guess, to get a political compromise, because that's what should be happening in Washington is compromise, in order to get urban lawmakers to vote for subsidies and safety nets for farmers who are oftentimes rural. In the 1970s, the food stamps program, as it was then known, was put into this into the Farm Bill to get the political compromise. So that's kind of how it became an omnibus bill, is you needed to somehow get rural lawmakers who care about their constituents to agree with urban lawmakers who care about their constituents. And therefore, if you combine food stamps, which are, Americans of all stripes use the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, which is the food stamp program. Mm. But you can argue per capita because there's more people who live in urban environments. It's mainly an urban thing. So it was a compromise to get urban and rural to kind of work together, and that's how you get the omnibus package out of it.
Would you call that a rider, Jason?
I wouldn't necessarily. We talked before about a rider, how it's, especially in gun violence, how riders are used to sneak in something that essentially has no correlation or connection with the legislation. So it's sneaking in a legislative proposal into a piece of legislation for which there's no relation between the two. It's oftentimes a trick used to get something passed that perhaps shouldn't be passed or is politically expedient for special interest groups.
Or alternatively, to sort of torpedo the chances of a bill passing that certain lawmakers don't want to be passed.
That's right. I don't think we're necessarily seeing that with a debate on the Farm Bill now. This is a phenomenon. Like, if you're interested in political science or just the state of our politics, this is fascinating. So the Farm Bill was just voted down yesterday in the House of Representatives. Everything we're talking about now is the House of Reps. So it's about 435 House members. 198 voted for it. 213 voted against it. Every single Democrat voted against the Farm Bill, and 30 Republicans voted against it. Most of those Republicans were members of the House Freedom Caucus. They're kind of known as the Tea Party Republicans who came in 2010, sort of the midterm of Obama's first presidency. So all Democrats, House Democrats, voted against it. 30 very far-right Republicans voted against it, but they voted against it for different reasons. The Democrats voted against the Farm Bill because Donald Trump has come out and directed all of his federal agencies to create stricter work requirements on all federal assistance programs, on all welfare programs. So this happened a few months ago where he directed all of his agencies to say, hey, if we want to give federal assistance to people, they need to demonstrate that they're trying to get work, or that they're working to better their lives, or something like that. So the Democrats have opposed this because this would make the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, individuals would have to demonstrate that they are either employed in a part-time job or doing 20 hours a week of workforce development. Of course, that sounds great. We all want our American citizens to work and better their lives and get out of poverty. But obviously the problem is that if you qualify for SNAP to begin with, you have to have certain income requirements. And if you start working a part-time job, you may no longer qualify for other federal assistance programs, such as for housing. And so, okay, you all of a sudden have a part-time job. Great, you're working, but
you can't pay rent.
Yeah, but your part-time job pays you $9 an hour, and now you can't pay rent. So, on paper it sounds great. Yeah, make people work, but obviously in practice, if you look at all the details, the economy is simply not designed to support our lowest income earners because the economy produces an underclass. That's my opinion.
So, I have a question for you.
Mm-hmm.
Because the bill didn't pass, are things like SNAP and the safety net for farmers no longer being funded right now?
No, this was supposed to be renewed in September, I believe, is when it sort of needs to be renewed by. Also, there's a lot more hurdles to go through, so this does not kill the Farm Bill. The Farm Bill is coming back. It needs to come back. The Senate has been working on a more bipartisan measure. The Senate is always generally more bipartisan because it's a tighter vote count between the two. So they've been working on a bipartisan measure, and obviously Donald Trump needs to sign this thing in the end. But that brings into why conservatives didn't vote for this. And many of the House Freedom Caucus didn't vote for the Farm Bill, even if they agreed with its components, especially the work requirements to the SNAP program. They didn't vote for it because they used it as a political bargaining chip. They said, we will vote no on the Farm Bill unless Paul Ryan, you allow us to vote on a very restrictive
immigration
bill. Yeah, that's been in the works by Robert Goodlatte, a very conservative member and chairman of the House Judiciary Committee. So the House Freedom Caucus said, we will vote no on the Farm Bill unless you allow a vote to happen on a very restrictive immigration bill.
They've gone so far right, they've gone all the way around and become leftists.
They've gone all the way around and joined with the Democrats. That's right. But this reminds me a lot of last year with the debate on the Affordable Care Act, right? The only reason why the Affordable Care Act wasn't really repealed is because there were conservatives that were so conservative that they
just wanted to dismantle it completely.
They didn't want government. Yeah, so
they were the Hamas of the Affordable Care Act.
You can definitely go there.
That was a joke.
Yeah, no, I know. I'm just messing with you. I think you can go there. Talk about the NRA and all that. But add one more layer to the Farm Bill, folks, is that at all this time, so you have Democrats who don't support the Farm Bill because of these sort of more restrictive work requirements. You have arch conservatives who don't support the Farm Bill because they used it as a political bargaining chip to get really restrictive immigration legislation. You also have more moderate Republicans who are currently actually working with Democrats to try to force a vote on immigration. Instead of forcing a vote on immigration for Bob Goodlots, again, that guy who has the restrictive immigration plan, the moderate Republicans are working with the Democrats to do what's called a discharge petition. That's essentially making so that if you get more than half of the members of the House to agree on voting for something, then that vote can happen before legislation goes through a committee, blah, blah, blah. We can go more in depth into that another time, but long story short is you have this layer where now there's moderate Republicans working with Democrats to try to get legislation passed for especially the DACA program that Donald Trump had set to expire. So you have all of this really remarkable legislation and political maneuvering going on in a midterm election year. So I remember at the start of the year, a lot of political analysts said, yeah, you're not going to see anything come out of Congress this year because
Everybody's trying to get reelected.
Reelected, yeah. So no one wants to take up a controversial issue that will not get them elected, and it can be used as, political firebrand. But
boy, were they wrong.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting, what is actually scary to me is that I think everyone is doing what they're doing because they think it will help them to get reelected. Right? I mean, that's...
In the age of Trump, it has become sort of politically expedient to be... What? To draw a lot of attention to yourself, to be controversial. Yeah, I mean, the House Freedom Caucus guys are doing this. The House Freedom Caucus guys would allow the Farm Bill to not be voted on. Again, a farm bill that really benefits a lot of rural conservative farmers who elected Donald Trump. Well, rural farmers who tend to vote conservative.
Tend to. Mm-hmm. They would allow that to expire because I think that their constituents want to see a super restrictive immigration legislation happen. So,
but they're severely handicapping their livelihood.
Right.
In the process.
Yeah, so it's really, really an interesting thing, and that it definitely warrants further attention to this farm bill. We'll see where it goes, but again, it'll be with the Senate, and it might be back in the House, and it's all tied up with other things, such as the social safety net and also immigration. Folks, we have 1 minute to talk about the very last piece of news that we decided to talk upon, and
there's a school shooting this week.
Unfortunately, just yesterday. The school shooting happened in Santa Fe High School, south of Houston, and there were 10 victims, and the current suspect is a 17-year-old student at the school who used his father's shotgun and a revolver to shoot people at the school.
Was he captured?
He was captured. Apparently, the reports say that he planned to commit suicide, but he surrendered instead, and he's currently in custody. So,
one quick thing I wanted to mention before we go is,
sure.
Did you hear that the NRA recently filed a lawsuit challenging Florida's raising the age of requirement to purchase a firearm?
I think they did that right after Florida did that. I think it was like hours after.
A judge announced this week that two of the claimants in the case, a 19-year-old man and a 19-year-old woman, will not be able to file that lawsuit anonymously. If they want to go through with it, they will have to announce their names.
That's good. Yeah, more transparency. So it'll be interesting to see as more comes out about this story, how it'll be spun, and of course, whether or not, well, you know how the gun debate goes. You can listen to our episodes 2 and 3 when we really delve deep into gun violence in America.
Those episodes are on YouTube?
They are at our Evidence of Design channel. Search Evidence of Design Episode 1 or something like that.
It's like the 17th result.
That's right. That's all right. Scroll down, Evidence of Design Episode 1. You'll see it. Folks, thanks a lot for listening to us today. This was Evidence of Design Week in the News here on 100.9 FM WXIR. My name is Jason Taylor, your host, and I was joined today by my good friend and co-host,
Matt Treadwell.
Thanks, folks. Be well, be safe, have fun. Bye-bye.